South Africa by 2020 has a government that's super authoritative and that's pretty much a paranoid government. Under the pressure from the ruling party, the government opts for two types of priorities. Number one is to drive direct investment in the economy, so pumping a lot of money into state-owned enterprises and sort of sectors of the economy that were left to the private sector, but where the government feels there's not enough traction. And then number two, the government puts pressure on other groups to contribute higher and faster and more, whether they want it or not. So the result of that is because those programs are paid through unpopular taxes and unpopular measures, these programs have limited success. Another reason why they have limited success is because even though government invests in training and skills, there's not enough skills, there's not enough capacity to run such big programs on such a scale in such a short time.
When I look at development using the walk behind scenario, I think about it from the point of view of it being a very sexy and kind of attractive initial option for most governments, because governments like to think of themselves as a service provider, as a regulator, as an investor, as all of these things to people. And the tendency when people in government see a number of these problems and challenges is to think about how much capacity they can build to solve them, okay? And to solve them as an independent agency within the country, not taking into context what business is going to do, what civil society is going to do, okay? To do that, as Malik was saying, you're going to have to be a very specific type of government with very specific type of skills that is able to be discerning enough to pick the winners, as they say in the scenario language, between those national champions that you want to support and invest in, the ones that you think have the most impact over the longest period of time, and to support them with enough capital that they start to give you the kind of tax revenue that you need to continue to find others. A government is an investment entity, just like a corporate is. And so one of the fundamental things that I think you see over and over again in the scenarios is that you need to look at both sides of the government's balance sheet, assets and liabilities, okay? And you need to say to yourself, the rand that's being spent in this area has to at some point generate a return that can come back and pay down on the liability side. And my view is that our government underestimates just the level of sophisticated planning that is necessary for you to be all things to all people in your country, in the way that I think a lot of African countries aspire to be, which is what China has done. Okay? If you look at China, and I spent a lot of time studying China when I was doing my graduate work, they have a particular type of society with literally millions of engineers, okay, in that country, millions of doctors, millions of teachers, and people that can really provide the capacity for government to be the start and the finish of all programs in their country. And they also have a particular culture which we don't have, as Rick was referring to. We don't have a authoritarian kind of response mechanism that says, this is the boss, I'm going to do what the boss says and I'm not going to question. Now, obviously Chinese people are evolving and different parts of China has pockets of kind of some of the fight that we have as South Africans. But I don't think as a nation we factor in the difference between the cultural differences between China and ourselves. So I don't believe we can ever do what they do, which is to have the planning down to the last rand or the last yuan that's invested in each part of the profits. How many children you can have, all of the kind of decisions that big society makes are made literally by the government on behalf of the people. I think there's a fine difference between planning and coordination. And in a country like ourselves, I mean, we're not like the US or a developed country where we can completely rely on market forces. So there has to be a role that government plays to coordinate the investment efforts of the country. it has to be an honest role that is kind of brutally honest with itself about the level of corruption that leads to certain decision making. So I'm kind of comforted by the way that Trevor Manuel looks to be approaching the Planning Commission, which is much more as a coordinator, as a strategic thinker, as opposed to a decision maker. Somebody else in that role 4 years from now may not take that same perspective. And that's where the danger comes. And so I think we need to, as citizens, recognize that the seeds are there for us to go down that direction. But I think if we push back early enough to say, let us do some of the stuff, okay? Here I am, for instance, as an entrepreneur, what we've done for the SME sector is to introduce the IFC to a bank that was specializing in SMEs in South Africa and get them to bring their financing to the party and co-invest with government into that entity. And now that entity becomes a kind of a microcosm for how World Bank funding can be positively channeled without affecting the agenda to a specific center. And the government plays a role in making the World Bank feel comfortable enough to make the investment by co-investing.